So now it's time for some examples. I want to show and tell. So much more powerful than just telling you, right? So I want to share with you how Apple's been doing this for decades. You know, sometimes they're recycling ideas and themes, sometimes very effectively. The other benefit of using the same philosophy and repeating their behavior is that they have a multiplier effect upon their brand that they can leverage. One of the benefits is it requires a lot less spending on advertising and marketing than competitors because they've got this multiplier accumulated benefit over the years. Huge benefit. So before I show you some of these examples, I want to do a quick recap of these principles, okay? Or what I'm now calling the pillars. So it's just a little more Kool-Aid for you to drink, all right? The first one is focus. Make it simple. Minimize and eliminate other opportunities. The second, be iconic. Boil what you do down to the essence or what you want to say, to the high quality essence that is imbued in it. And the third, empathy, this notion of creating loved experiences through products, that type of thing. This is both first impressions as well as lasting impressions. Of course, this is all still based on core human values and behaviors, right? Okay, now here's the thing. Apple started in 1977, and they did a great job of marketing and branding themselves. They looked and sounded a lot better than any of the other competitors. But the truth was, for a number of those years, the products were not actually that much better. They were a little bit better here and there, but on average, they were pretty close to all of their competitors in terms of performance and what it was like to use them and so on. It wasn't until 1984 when Apple introduced the Macintosh and they unveiled this new concept for how they thought about their product line that they started to capitalize on the initial thinking. So they called the Macintosh a personal computer for the rest of us. Focus on personal and for the rest of us. They're already thinking and talking very differently. What you see here is an early show and tell ad that was designed to be both empathetic and educational. It was used for the Macintosh introduction. And let's break it down so we can see how it's working here. I want to go through the anatomy of why this was so effective. Firstly, it's got a very empathetic headline. Apple introduces Macintosh, the computer for the bemused, confused, and intimidated. Well, that represented the majority of us out there at the time, right? Secondly, it's got this lovable screen display that says hello. At the time, most computers displayed something that was about performance on their screens. Might be a chart or a graph or a massive spreadsheet or something doing some calculating, right? Next, it presented a very simple product. Instead of something that looked like it required a lot of work, it looked like, oh, it's all there. It's really small, simple, doesn't take up much desk space. Also, they used iconic images and text to describe some of the features. I love the use of the mouse below, where it says, if you can point, you can use Macintosh. They also used lovable images to reinforce what you could do. Some of these, two of the screens to the right are about business, that type of thing. The other two are about fun and self-expression. And then lastly, this wasn't part of the ad, but every Macintosh that was delivered came with a simple setup package that walked you through the steps for setting it up, and it even came with a cassette tape so you could listen to the routine for doing so. 14 years later, after Steve Jobs returned to Apple, the first product he introduced was the iMac. This was one of the first ads. Look at this. It's an iconic image that's being displayed here. There's an empathetic headline reiterating this theme, right? Personal computing for the rest of us, chic, not geek. There's also a simple iconic product design and name that goes along with it, the iMac. But look also, you can't even see the screen of it. What it shows on the screen is irrelevant. It's all about the experience that you might have with this device, okay? All right, let's look at some other examples. Here's another product that Apple introduced, but notice they didn't focus on the hardware, even though it was a hardware product. The iPod was basically a simplified MP3 player with a nicer user interface. And then it had been bundled with iTunes that made it a really cool store. But aside from those, technologically, it wasn't that different than any of the other MP3 players available in the market. Yet within 2 years, they had captured 90% of that market. And look at it. It had an iconic name, the iPod. It had an iconic design, iconic user interface. But most importantly, it had an iconic benefit. The way Steve Jobs described it, it's 1,000 songs in your pocket. Not about the product, it was about the benefit, the outcome of using the product and owning it. And then that was followed up with a brilliant, iconic ad campaign. It was simple, and everything about it was iconic and lovable. There were no headlines in it. There was just the name of the product, a depiction of a user having a fantastic time enjoying the product, dancing, singing, rocking out with the product. And even the product wasn't emphasized. All you see is a silhouette of it. Apple made this an amazing award-winning marketing campaign that ultimately drove the total domination of the MP3 music player market for Apple. They continued the same kind of thinking when they decided to develop their own stores. They created a floor plan that was based on 4 zones based on each of the core need states that an Apple customer or shopper might be interested in exploring. And it was designed to be a temple for memorable experiences for anybody who walked through those doors. It was designed for exploring, sharing, shopping, learning, as well as fixing as comfortably as possible. Okay, all right, let's drill down a little further. Once you were in the store, the experience was human-based. They had geniuses who were trained to communicate in a jargon-free way. They were trained and coached to deliver comfort to you, whatever your level of technical sophistication was. They were all about empathetic problem solving, as well as sharing appreciation for you being an Apple customer or potential customer. Okay, so these are some good examples of how Apple's practiced it. So I want to talk about some of the benefits here as it relates to your business, because this is all scalable down, right? So they came up with these simple, sustainable ideas and a way of thinking that really, truly had legs. Look here at what's happened with the iPhones. Now, here was the thing. They invented the iPhone and introduced it because Steve Jobs felt like this notion of smartphones at the time was fake news. He thought it was a lie. He didn't think the phones at the time were smart at all and was continually frustrated by them, and decided if anybody was going to develop a better one, it would be Apple. That core concept now continues to evolve every year and will continue to until we no longer need a physical phone and we have some kind of implant that Apple will no doubt be behind. Anyhow, you get the idea right there, right? Here's the other factor. It can be very profitable. So Apple has taken simple, lovable innovation and taken it all the way to the bank. Remember the long tail? Well, Apple hunts for and wants to own the steep end of that tail. Thinking different can pay very well for you. Okay? But I want to provide some caution here. This applies to all businesses. I've certainly seen it in mine too. There's no playing it safe. Just because you've been innovative, you've thought differently, you've launched something, doesn't mean you can rest on that and play it safe. Compare what happened to Apple after Steve Jobs left the company in 1985. It continued to grow sales because John Sculley was a great manager and a great marketing guy. But the innovation slowed down and competitors started catching up, and Apple wasn't moving the ball up the ladder at all. So the inevitable result was that profit margins started shrinking and shrinking because they couldn't charge as big a premium. So fast forward to when Steve Jobs returns to Apple, Apple had actually started losing money and shrinking as a company. Steve simplified the company. He fired entire divisions of people and got out of massive businesses to simplify the company on doing a few things really well. A year later, he introduced the iMac and brought the company back to profitability. And then he followed that with Apple Stores, the iPod, iTunes, iPhone, and so on. The rest is history. But all of that was driven by thinking differently and continually thinking differently. Now, we've all seen the news. Apple has hit another rough patch right now. And guess what? They just don't look like they've been innovating for the last few years. And it's time for them to hunker down and start thinking differently again. It feels to me like they've been playing it too safe.